Once again, Julian found himself unable to estimate the number of people around him with any great precision. Looking backward, he saw more than 1,000 black faces peering up at the podium, filling the area with a comfortable density and not an oppressive one. The atmosphere felt like history in the making, the multitudes standing together with a shared intention, waiting to hear the Reverend Shaver's call to action. Along the perimeter, vans from local television stations balanced cameras above them, recording the crowd as the program began. After an opening prayer, a social media influencer stepped up to the podium and delivered an impassioned speech in the style that had earned him millions of followers. They were fighting against an unjust system that had existed since before they were born, he told them. A system that inertia would carry onward into eternity unless they worked together to shift its direction. The crowd roared approval. An economist offered a vision of the financial power that would be unleashed by putting billions of dollars into black communities. As Dr. King said, he reminded the audience, the poor, transformed into purchasers, will do a good deal on their own. Next, a mayor from the Midwest spoke of the success of a pilot program in her city. She urged the crowd to pressure their local representatives for equitable economic policies and social programs to reduce poverty. Excitement built as a member of Congress gave a rousing speech, first urging them to ask their own representatives to support H.R. 40, a bill to study reparations, and then challenging them to turn out and vote that fall. Turn out and vote, Julian echoed disdainfully. Like that'll make a difference. It could, Edith insisted. We have power, Julian. Doesn't matter, not with the choices they give us. He gripped the cardboard tube, comforted by the unyielding center. It's pay to play. We wouldn't all be here today if we were in the game. Her eyes twinkled. I'm all for changing the game. The audience erupted with cheers as the Reverend Alvin Shaver was introduced. Bounding up the stairs with surprising agility for a man sculpted from generations of Southern cooking, the preacher boomed out a greeting through his headset microphone. In his late 40s, his hair was still jet black, but his short beard was undergoing follicle gentrification. Around them, people pulled out their phones to snap pictures for social media. Edith held her own up, recording video of Shaver. The Reverend stood basking in the morning light, arms spread in a vaguely crucifixion-like pose as he began. Dear Lord, he intoned, we thank you for the bounty of your sunshine this morning. We're grateful for its warmth, which you have created in your wisdom, that every one of your children can benefit from. It is freely available to all your creatures. It feeds the cycle of life. It brings order to our day. The sun, however, is a master of illusion. His hand pointed upward with an accusing finger. We may think we see it rising above the nation's capital, but we're really looking backward in time at the light let loose 8.5 minutes ago. Now, it's always good to look forward, but sometimes we benefit from looking backward as well, to examine how we arrived where we are. This year, we will observe the 250th anniversary of America's founding. Millions will celebrate. I will commemorate. I will remember. I will cast a critical eye backward over those 2.5 centuries. Whatever you might call it, the semi-quincentennial, the quarter millennial, or the sesquicentennial, I call it a failure to live up to the plain words of that declaration. All people have unalienable rights, and among them are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Like many of you, Shaver said, his arms open to embrace the crowd, I am a descendant of enslaved people. We stand here in the shadow of the Washington Monument, in the shadow of a man whose legacy is both figuratively and literally built upon the backs of our ancestors. If we were to climb up and look out upon the district, we'd see a city where the average household income exceeds $100,000, yet 1 in 4 children lives in poverty. We'd see a city where white households have 81 times the wealth of black households. We'd see a city which for centuries has directed a deliberate and determined diminishment of rights for people of color. His voice quickened. That legacy is indefensible. We are here today in pursuit of reparations for crimes against our humanity, committed by Washington and his spiritual successors. We hold this truth to be self-evident. We have a right to be made whole. From the stage, the Reverend pointed a finger at Edith. There's a sister over here with a sign calling up the words of Frederick Douglass. Power concedes nothing without a demand. Edith looked starstruck at the recognition. We are here today to make our demand, to serve notice that justice is past due. You're famous, Julian whispered loudly to Edith. She looked sideways at him, her eyes inviting his attention. Hush. He even knew whose quote it was, Julian prodded. Hush up, Edith said again, a mischievous smile dancing across her lips. She bumped her hip against his to punctuate the statement, but as her gaze turned back to the stage, the contact persisted. Julian said nothing else, but pressed back firmly. Shaver continued. We can look backward across America's history. We can look backward to 2023 as the members of the Supreme Court, whose honorific I find ironic, struck down affirmative action. Close enough, they said. Let's call it even. We can look backward to 2009 and the reduction of the sentencing disparity between crack cocaine and the powdered cocaine from 100 to 1 to 18 to 1. Close enough, said Congress, a representative body for those with money and power. We can look backward to 1995 and the punitive policies adopted by Congress. Even as the tide of mass incarceration has begun to recede, the formerly incarcerated are still marked with the scarlet letters that empower the new Jim Crow today. Julian roared his frustration. We can look backward to 1971 and the launching of the racist war on drugs used as an excuse to restrict our rights. We can look backward to the 1950s and the Federal Housing Administration's support of redlining, denying generations of blacks the opportunity to build wealth through home ownership. We can look backward to 1938 and the passage of the Fair Labor Standards Act. How a nation defines the word fair gives great insight into its character. To systematically exclude a majority of black workers for decades was unjust. Reparations are past due. We can look backward to 1913 and a president who reintroduced segregation to the civil service, requiring applicants to include a photograph so candidates of color could be weeded out. We can look backward to Plessy versus Ferguson in 1896, establishing the fanciful legal doctrine of separate but equal. We can look backward to America's centennial and the deal struck to decide the presidential election. As Southern blacks watched the federal troops march away, did they know that their brief moment in the sun had come to an end and that a long, violent night stretched out before them? We can look backwards to 1862 and the passage of the Homestead Act, offering up hundreds of millions of acres of public land for Americans and immigrants alike, as long as they weren't black. We can look backwards to 1857 and the Dred Scott decision proclaiming blacks would never be citizens. They had no rights whites were bound to respect. We can look backwards to 1835 and see the first race riot in this city, not by the free blacks upset by the open trading of brothers and sisters being sold south, or the taxes they paid to support the district schools whose doors were closed to their children. No, it was hundreds of whites who directed destruction against the black district, riled up by fraudulent accusations against a black teenager by a white woman. We can look backward to the Naturalization Act of 1790, the work of the very first Congress, which codified that the only immigrants permitted to become citizens were free white persons. We can look backwards to 1787 and the drafting of the Constitution. Dozens of rich white men gathered in the city of brotherly love and very earnestly agreed the importation of slaves for the next 20 years was fine, as long as their government got a cut of the profits with a head tax. We can even look all the way back to Thomas Jefferson's draft of America's birth certificate, complaining that King George had interfered with our Negroes. 250 years ago, the foundation of this nation was built on false promises. Blacks have been held back, in chains and incarcerated by decisions and declarations. While we cannot change the past, we can correct the future, so that when we look backward from America's tricentennial, we no longer find ourselves living, as Dr. King said, on an island of poverty in the midst of a vast ocean of material prosperity. When we look backward from the tricentennial, we will find that power conceded to our demand. Again, Shaver gestured to Edith and her sign, which waved up and down in response. For this we fight. Reparations are our right. I think he likes you, Julian Stage whispered to Edith. She said nothing, but fixed him with an appraising glance. Her impish smirk left him contemplating the many hours left in the day and all the possibilities that might unfold. For good measure, he waggled his eyebrows suggestively before deliberately looking away. When we look backward from the tricentennial, Shaver continued, leaning into his subject, we will see that America struggled with the truth of what it owes the descendants of enslaved people and reconciled itself to justice. For this we fight, he called, and the crowd roared back the response, drowning out his words. Reparations are our right. When we look backward from the tricentennial, we'll see that King's dream has been achieved. Our children will be judged by the content of their character and not the color of their skin. For this we fight. Reparations are our right, Edith hollered enthusiastically, beating one hand against her thigh as she held her phone and sign with the other. When we look backward from the tricentennial, Shaver repeated, whipping the crowd into a frenzy of anticipation for the next pronouncement, we'll see that our nation has been spiritually reborn and at long last addressed his triple evils of poverty, racism, and militarism. For this we fight. Reparations are our right, Julian yelled. When we look backward from the tricentennial, Shaver said again, the crowd surging with optimism for this vision of the future, we'll see that black men and women have all the rights whites have to respect. As the call and response came again, there was some kind of disturbance off to one side of the stage. Shaver didn't seem to notice. When we look backward from the tricentennial, he projected, we'll see that... A single gunshot interrupted his words. Edith gasped as Shaver clutched his midsection. Julian tightened his grip on the sign pole. 4 armed men with a paramilitary aura rushed across the stage, led by a young white male with a bushy red beard. Shaver sank to one knee, clutching the lower left quadrant of his torso. Oh, Lord, he moaned into the headset, sending the words reverberating across the field. Edith pulled away from Julian, an expletive falling from her lips in surprise. He stayed rooted in place, instinctively pulling his sign from the pole. staples unzipping rhythmically as he analyzed the situation. The crowd was not yet panicked. A few enterprising souls were still recording with their phones as the red-bearded man shot the Reverend in the chest. Shaver crumpled to the stage as two of the gunmen angled AR-15s toward the crowd. Individuals in the audience began to retreat. The red-bearded man plucked the headset from Shaver's body and spoke into it. "Reparations are theft," he proclaimed, gesturing wildly with a handgun. "Our Caucasian forefathers didn't build this nation so you ungrateful bastards could rob us. This country was formed for the white, not the black." As the leader began to rant, two of the men jumped down from the stage. The crowd teetered on the edge of a stampede. Julian watched the closest gunman. He was practically a boy, his pale features radiating nervousness, the handgun he clutched wavering unsteadily. "Let's go," Edith said, grabbing Julian's arm and tugging it. Crazily, Julian imagined what a perfect story this would be to tell in the future. "She'd only just met me," he'd say, "and already Edith wanted us to run away together." The first screech of a police siren began to rise, and the boyish gunman turned to look for it as the red-bearded man cried out, "Now!" Julian shook off Edith's hand and began to sprint forward. Bursts of semi-automatic fire gave birth to screams and cries. Julian ignored them, rapidly closing on the boyish gunman. He gripped the end of the pole, gauging its heft, and swung it like a baseball bat. It connected solidly with the back of his target's head, sending him into the grass. Julian whirled his weapon again, this time in a high arc, and brought it down on his skull. Julian knelt and plucked the gun from the lifeless man's hand, looking for a target. The other gunman who jumped down from the stage was firing an AR-15 indiscriminately into the retreating crowd. Julian took a deep breath and aimed carefully, squeezing the trigger 3 times in rapid succession before the man pitched forward. Swiveling toward the stage, Julian saw he'd drawn the attention of another attacker. When the man fired, the impact tugged Julian sideways. It was as if he were underwater. The air seemed to resist him as he lifted his weapon. The twitch of his finger repeated until his own shots found their mark, and the man tumbled backward onto the stage. Satisfaction was short-lived. His gun empty, Julian shifted his focus to the boyish gunman, kneeling to pat down the still form, frenetically searching for another weapon, for ammunition, ignoring the sharp pain the movement triggered inside him, ignoring the wailing police sirens, ignoring the cacophony of panicked screams. Then one voice cut through the stew of sounds. "Julian, look out!" A glance at the stage revealed the man with the red beard striding toward him. Piercing blue eyes filled with hate as he lifted his arm. The same arm, the same hand, the same gun that had pointed unhesitatingly at Reverend Shaver before he fell. Julian stumbled to his feet, clamping a hand to his side to staunch the splash of wetness. His gaze cast about like a searchlight, seeking something to duck behind, and he caught a glimpse of Edith. Lying prone on the ground, she was staring right at him. Their eyes locked as she screamed again, "Look out!" The words echoed uncontrollably over the flurry of gunshots, and in that moment he glimpsed infinity. A blinding, chaotic expanse, punctuated with lancing pain, the greatest of which was the injustice that he would never see Edith Bartlett again.
Some answers, a little bit of truth. Some answers, a little bit of truth.